Hello, everyone. Welcome to ThinkTech's virtual meetups for the summer season, an initiative organized by the Saudi Ministry of Communications and Information Technology. ThinkTech aims to create a stimulating digital environment and to spread digital awareness about emerging technologies. In this optic, we are happy to introduce you to a series of meetups focused on emerging technologies. Today, we have the session Innovating from Necessity, the business building imperative in the current crisis. Your moderator is Jigar Patel, partner at McKinsey & Company. Jigar has over 15 years of experience in using digital and analytics to enable business strategy and driving frontline transformations. He has broad experience through serving clients across multiple sectors, with a primary focus on telco, high-tech, public sector, and pharmaceuticals. After spending 10 years in London, he relocated to Riyadh and now leads the digital McKinsey practice across the Middle East and the McKinsey Leap across EEMA. Jigar, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. My name is Dr. Jigar Patel. I'm currently in Riyadh, and today I'll be joined by my colleague, Ralph Drashmeyer. And today we'll be talking to you about something that's been top of our mind pretty much since the COVID situation began and even before. There is an old proverb that says, necessity is the mother of all invention. And over the last few months, many things have become necessary that were previously not. It has become necessary to work from home. It has become necessary to keep your children at home and not send them to school. It has become necessary to continue maintaining relationships without physical touch or without physical proximity, and many other such examples. So in this new world that we have found ourselves, many companies and many entities have responded quite boldly in some cases, as you will learn. So our session today will focus on innovation from necessity, the business building imperative of today. I'm joined by Ralph. In a minute, I will pose a few questions and I'll moderate the session. But let me give you a quick brief on Ralph. So Ralph Drashmeyer is a senior partner based out of our London office. And he's been at this game a little bit longer than I have. He has over 25 years of experience, both in technology advisory, but more importantly, in building fundamentally digital and technology first companies. He understands how the barriers of technology, the barriers of putting together these businesses have evolved over time. And now we are standing pretty much at a point in time where it's very easy to start building businesses that scale and that can add value to existing conglomerates or existing companies. In recent years, he has been featured as a speaker on Forbes Live and been an esteemed member of several panels. So Ralph, welcome. Thank you for spending time with us.
Yeah, thank you, Jigar, and thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here. I've got a very good close affiliation to the region. I always come as often as I can to the region. I love the level of ambition, the level of innovation that I see, and I look forward to our conversation.
Excellent. So let's jump right in, if you don't mind. I guess we'll start at the top. Maybe Ralph, if you cast your mind over the last few months, maybe you could share with us an overall view of how have people actually responded to this particular crisis? What has kind of worked? What hasn't worked? What new things have they discovered? Maybe we'll start there and then keep the discussion rolling.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, it's quite interesting. When we describe like innovation or innovating from necessity, I think we've seen this through this last few months, actually, almost in two different ways. So the first one was the immediate impact that the pandemic had in terms of organizations had to change. They had to fundamentally change and innovate at a speed that was unthinkable before. So this innovating, driven by speed, doing things in days that would take weeks or months, doing things in weeks that would take years, that has been the first big wave of innovating from necessity that we have seen. I would say then the most organizations have been in a situation where we were more or less in a position where realizing the economic impact that this would have short term, and as a result, things like how can you protect your cash, how do you have to do some scenario planning in order to how you will evolve over this pandemic, and then the following economic crisis and recovery, which was more kind of a business as usual managing the crisis. But what we see now is that clients, companies are thinking now about the next normal. What will happen to them? How will they reimagine themselves in this next normal that we are seeing happening? And that really requires also a lot of innovation, because existing business models are turned upside down. New ways of working, new ways of doing business will come up. We will see new inventions, we will see new disruptions, and we will see a lot of business building as part of core strategic themes and opportunities in order to actually be successful in this next normal. And maybe if I just give you a couple of examples on these kind of what happened in the first phase in terms of how quickly organizations have changed and adapted and innovated. There are examples where a real estate company in China moved from a traditional real estate environment and business model to a completely digitally only experience, where using drones, using artificial intelligence and virtual reality to create kind of the same experience that house buyers would have had otherwise in the physical space. And in February, their sales went up by 118% when China was in lockdown. We see these, a lot in the pharma healthcare world, teleconsult platforms being stood up in weeks rather than in months or years as it was originally planned. And the famous saying that, what drove your digital transformation was the CEO, the CTO? No, it was COVID-19. So we have seen that in many, many cases, but not only reacting quickly to do something new, but also adjusting very quickly. So we've got an example where in Europe, a financial services player launched an omni-channel bank. But given the COVID setup and the lockdown, they switched completely to 100% digitally focused bank, because that's what the customer needs. So the changing customer needs have driven a lot of fundamental shifts that we've seen, in particular also in the beginning of the pandemic.
Right. I think I agree with you there, Ralph. A little bit, I think when a crisis hits, it's very much flight or fight. And what I've seen in this particular crisis is the fight response of entities has been much stronger than at least the previous, if you take the 2008, 2009 crises. It's definitely been faster and stronger on that front, particularly here in the Middle East and in Saudi. I've seen a number of organizations, both brand new, so in the startup world, but as well as incumbents who are thinking about how do we really turn this into an opportunity. And I think the people that move to action quicker, get the blood flowing quicker, I think are probably, just like human beings, more likely to kind of survive and ride out this wave. One interesting thought, perhaps also, as you've been studying this, even before the crisis, imagine you're an executive, you're about to walk into a boardroom, the crisis is in full mode, you're about to now convince your board that now's the time to embark on building a new business. What type of questions has that executive kind of gone through in their mind before approaching the board and trying to convince the board? I think it would be great to share that with our audience here.
Yeah, very good question, Jigar. And I mean, to be honest, the first question is, how can I convince a board if I'm not there in person? Because clearly, as we all know, almost any of our traditional face-to-face interactions have been or were moved into a virtual remote work, like we're doing this here today. And I think that to me is one of the biggest takeaways, like executives, boardrooms had to also adjust. Boardrooms are now virtual meetings. I was in one this morning. This is now becoming almost like the norm, where in the past it was almost unthinkable having such important meetings like this via virtual communication, via remote dial-in and via video conference. So I think the first thing is, how can you make sure that you don't lose effectiveness? How do you make sure that you still make the right, the same quality decisions in this new remote working style And that's, I think, the starting point. And clearly, we are moving in some geographies again to a more hybrid environment, but nevertheless, this adjustment to being able to do things remotely will have, and we'll come back to that later, will have a fundamental impact about the next normal and how we will operate as in business world, but also in society at large. The second thing is, which we shouldn't forget, at the end of the day, this is a health crisis, and therefore a lot of executives and a lot of boardrooms were clearly focused on the health aspect of the crisis for quite some time. And I think that has paid off very well. And I think it's really good to see that it was so important to make sure to save lives, to make sure that the health issue was addressed first and foremost. That's why the national lockdown happens, etc. But I think then it also comes to the kind of a what as we go through the crisis and go through the economic implications and coming out of it, what happens next. And I do think that we see more and more clients and companies to really think about the next normal as an opportunity to create the next S-curve for their business, to create new innovative way of thinking, to reimagining how their business will succeed in the next normal and what other business opportunities there are. And I think there are questions like every company executive has to ask themselves, how do the customer needs change post the immediate crisis? What will stay as part of this remote? We know the recovery will be digital for sure. And as a result, how do I actually therefore speed up my digital capabilities? Simple things like how can I create human-like interactions with customers that you will never meet? How can you can repair and fix devices that at the end of the day you will never touch or hold in your hands? How can you build a resilient supply chain without necessarily investing more and putting more capital into it? How can you variabilize your cost and operational structures in such a dynamic world where you have to adjust almost on a daily basis given certain external events? And how the obvious question, how can I bring out digital products in a new way quickly, in days or in weeks, rather than in months or years, because my competitors will do so as well. So if you think about all these questions, that is almost like what any disruptive business builders will ask every single time when building a new business, when coming up with a new business concept, and come up with the next big ideas. And I think they ask this question because they know this crisis will deliver and create such amazing and significant shifts that the new world that will be creating, the new solutions, they will not only resolve the crisis, but will also really reimagine the sectors that they're in and will create something that will never go back to where it was before.
Yeah, I think also, Ralph, if the difference that I see in today's world versus maybe even 2 years ago is the fact that we are much more ready as different entities, as business leaders, to build digital first businesses. And I think, whilst the crisis has created a bit of a perfect storm in a negative sense, from a digital lens, I think it's created a perfect storm from a positive sense. And I just wonder, from your vantage point, how is this different, given that we are now in a much more technologically advanced world, we are much more in a digital first world. What are some of the things that are out there that actually make it much more quicker and faster for boardrooms and executives to reach that decision of let's go out and build a new business?
Yeah, I mean, look, dare I admit it, but I think this is the first kind of economic downturn that I've experienced, and clearly this is a different one, both in terms of significance, in terms of size and impact and shock, but also clearly it is, as I said before, driven initially by health crisis, and it's all encompassing. It's a supply and the demand shock. It's really non-discriminatory. So it's very, very fundamental, much more so than things that we've seen before, like the financial crisis and others. So I think I think it's so fundamental that I simply believe the world will need to adopt to do things in a new way. And also there will be new ways of building new businesses that are built on the foundation and the assumption of how this new world will actually operate. And I think because it is so fundamental, the level of innovation, the level of new disruptive business builds that we will see will compare to nothing that we've ever seen before, because it just affects every sector, every geography in such fundamental way. So it will be, I think, a perfect storm, as you described it, for business builders and for bold moves, for disruptive moves, and for new innovative ways to actually build business that are fit for purpose in this new world.
Yeah, and in the current, let's say, in the current mode that the world is working in, if we and you and I have had this discussion, I think, in the past, but if we were to start a new digital business, why would we be excited today to start that? What is out there in the environment in today's world that makes us excited that a digital venture is something that we should pursue?
Yeah, I mean, look, I mean, clearly, you know, it is no deep insight anymore that, of course, the world will move towards a more digital environment, towards more digital interaction, towards more virtual interaction. But I do think, you know, as the crisis evolves, you know, there are particular kind of themes that we see that I think will drive some of these new disruptive business models and business builds that we just talked about. You know, so I think there is definitely something around speed. Mm-hmm. And speed is clearly at the essence and at the heart of any business builder, because the whole quest point is about getting something out, being MVP ready, and getting something out, getting customer insights, and then build it out further. That speed, I think, has changed completely in dimension. As I said before, it's like when we talk weeks, it's now days. When we talk months, it's now weeks. When we talk years, it's now months. And we have seen this so many times. Initially in the healthcare environment, where, you know, national health services were able to move into teleconsulting and telehealth within weeks, which was meant to be a 3 to 5 year digital transformation program. You know, we see completely new attitudes towards data. You know, in South Korea, the Corona 100-meter app, you know, millions downloaded the app immediately and were quite comfortable to share personal data in order to actually keep themselves, but also keep the country and society at large safe. The virtual customer engagement and experience, you know, I mentioned this real estate group in China. I mean, really creating in a very short period of time a completely virtual experience that is good enough to not only keep their business going, but to actually create an S-curve for them, a new growth spurt that they didn't expect initially when they started doing this. So I think when you increase your revenues by 118% during a lockdown period where you are actually selling real estate, that's one of the examples where you can say this is how fundamental the world has changed, and the consumer experience and the expectations have changed.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, and interestingly enough, I mean, some of the examples you were using are clearly private sector examples, but the NHS is a great example. If I actually look at healthcare and education in the public sector, in the government kind of realm in most countries, these, the mechanisms of deploying healthcare, the mechanisms of deploying education, I think all of us overnight became at-home teachers. I know I have 2 young girls, and it's always a struggle in the morning to get them logged on and learning. But these 2 sectors, which were traditional and government-owned across many, almost all countries, they have also transformed overnight, right? So I think it's not just the private sector, it's also the public sector, and it really doesn't matter how much legacy was in the way. I think we have shown a resilience to continue to try and do what we needed to do. I think those 3 areas that you highlighted, Ralph, around moving and changing, in terms of speed, so overnight digital transformation, the abundance of data, and also the fundamental change in the ability to engage customers virtually using all the different technologies out there. I think these definitely have been catalysts. One interesting point of view, though, and I think it's a question that also came in here from somebody that's watching. How do you actually deliver on that speed, experiment with new technologies, and make use of all the data you have when over the last 5 to 10 years you've been slowly eroding away your IT capability by outsourcing it, offshoring it, and essentially just keeping behind a small technology organization? So how have companies that have been on that journey responded and developed new businesses?
Yeah, it's a very good and interesting question. I think there are two elements to this. So, I have also coming back to your public sector point, what I just described is clearly, as you rightly say, it's not only in the private sector, but the public sector has transformed significantly and at a speed that was unthinkable for sure. But I think on the point about how do you deal with it, how do you make it happen given your current setup? So it's quite interesting that, from a senior executive level, the conversation that I have had after the first 1 or 2 months of the crisis, where, look, we are in such a extreme situation that we have found ways to get things done that we thought would never be possible. We as an organization. And if I'm the CEO of this organization, what I would love more than anything else, how can I somehow package this up in a vacuum and keep this as the way we're going to work going forward forever? Because I never thought we as an organization were meant to do that. So this recognition of that you can do things that you never thought you would is I think, one of the key takeaways. How can you actually maintain this type of momentum and speed? That's the wish from the CEOs. From a team perspective, I think there was, I think I wouldn't say there's a silver bullet, but there was a combination of some pragmatism, the necessity, again, we talked about necessity to innovate, the necessity to do things in a different way. I've got this example which is in public-private sector in the combination, at the very early days in the pandemic in Europe, where Italy really, really struggled. They had a problem that a certain part of a ventilator was not available. And there was a small startup who had 3D printing capabilities who came up with, they can print this part in a very effective way directly in the hospitals. So 3D printers were positioned in the hospital to actually make sure that you don't run out of stock out of this part, which was absolutely crucial. So now you would have not done that in normal times. It would have taken ages and procurement contracts, etc. Some of these things were just being put aside to be pragmatic, rational, but at the same time very, very, very speed and time focused in order to get things done. And I think we will learn a lot about how organizations will operate going forward from that. And I think we will see quite a lot of things that we've seen now that have happened, because of it had to, because of necessity. We will see a lot of these things continuing to happen in the business as usual basis in the next normal.
Yeah. If Ralph, let me try also going down a slightly different avenue. If we think about this crisis and we think about all of the opportunity it's created and all of the kind of risks that it has introduced into the way of doing business or into the predominant business models of today. And given, again, the catalytic factors that you have highlighted and why now would be a good time to embark on a new digital business building journey. What type of businesses do you think are likely to come out of this crisis successfully? Not just, and I guess my question is not about tell us the next new company, but what type of companies will really survive when they use this offensive mechanism of playing offense and creating new businesses, creating new revenue streams, hitting new markets and new value pools. Describe the nature of that company.
Yeah, so first of all, I think you highlighted a very important point, which is, a pattern that we've recognized through all of the previous crises as well. There is a type of innovations that come out of crisis. So first of all, there is a lot of innovation. There will be unicorns created in every crisis. We've seen this over and over again. But what we also observed is that there are certain patterns of type of businesses that will emerge from the crisis. During SARS, there was a rise of e-commerce, not too dissimilar to what we've seen during the crisis now. But if you take the global financial crisis, the shared economy was born. Uber, Airbnb were created during that crisis. The gig economy was born, and companies like TaskRabbit existed all of a sudden. So those were the kind of the themes that created new unicorns. If we look at the current crisis and what we pick up, and clearly it is still very early days, but we've observed a couple of kind of stereotypes of business or business attributes that we believe will create the next set of unicorns. And there are 5 or 6 of them. So if I maybe run quickly through them. So one is kind of we would describe it the remote service provider, which is basically online provision of services that go far beyond the traditional services that you would see online. So this is online service providers such as doctors, teachers, lawyers, architects. So higher value kind of activities that all of a sudden will be provided remotely rather than face-to-face. Then the rise, and we're just experiencing it here, the rise of collaboration platforms. I think collaboration platforms with the remote working that, as we know from many organizations, will stay, will not go back to normal for some parts of an organization. Those collaboration platforms will become a core dimension of our way of doing business, way of interacting going forward, without any doubt. Then we've got an interesting aspect around, we describe it a little bit like the dynamic talent deployer. So you've got access to global talent pools in a completely different way using technology, but also you can pivot jobs in a way that was not possible before. I mean, I give you an example. During the crisis, there are also sectors affected in different ways. So in the UK, where I'm based, there was a situation where because of lockdown and the collapse of the travel industry, a lot of people who were packing luggage at airports were without a job. All of a sudden, they would actually be moved towards, they were packing groceries because the grocery business was shooting up, double, tripled because of online delivery. So there are these movements of dynamic talent allocation, which we haven't seen before in that way. I mentioned already the high-touch digital retailer. I mentioned the estate agent, which is not necessarily retail, but it's a good example. So there's really new retail categories which create a completely virtual experience that is high-touch, but it is online, it is digital, it's no longer real-time or real world. The data visionary, which is, again, we touched on data a little bit, but this is not only using data for analytics and automation, actually that is obvious, but we're using it in a very different way. Things like digital twins, virtual reality will provide completely new ways of doing things in the virtual world before you do them in the real world. And we see a really huge uptake of those type of technologies as well. And then the last but not least, the kind of an operator that is resilient, but is also flexible and therefore not redundant. So, how can you manage your supply chain in a resilient way, but also in a cost-efficient way that is differentiated through AI and other more advanced technologies in order to create this kind of resilience, but also at the same time cost efficiency.
Right. I think those 6 archetypes are actually quite interesting, and almost as you are going through those, for each one I can think of at least a new logo that has been introduced, a new icon that's been introduced onto my iPhone, right? Many of these apps already out there, and much like you said, right, the rate at which these new entities are being born is phenomenal right now. If we continue here, I would also be interested, Ralph, if you could share some perspectives with the audience around during the crisis, why is it really necessary to go out and try and build something new? Right? It's a simple question. Why not just stick to what you know and try and hit the home runs in your home field?
Yeah, and I think it's a very, very good and fair question. And I don't want to underplay the importance of running an existing business and managing it through a crisis is not an easy feast. And of course, one has to spend time and effort on that. But I would say the future leaders in their industries and sectors, they're thinking beyond that. Of course, they need to do that, and of course, they need to manage through the crisis with their existing business. But the leaders of tomorrow, they also recognize that every crisis is an opportunity to disrupt. Every crisis is an opportunity to innovate.
Right.
Sometimes out of necessity, sometimes out of opportunity, but it is a huge opportunity. And it's what we see more and more is that business building for many organizations is not just something that you would like to do because it sounds great or fancy. It is really something strategic. It will become a differentiating capability that will differentiate the leaders and the laggards going forward, because the way they reacted in and beyond the crisis in terms of identifying new opportunities, new growth opportunities, new S-curves. And as any crisis accelerates the pace of change, I think the question of being disrupted or being a disruptor becomes even more important and more high profile. And as a result, there are incumbents who can really transform faster by building new businesses. And many of the leading innovators of today's world, they have emerged during crisis. You know, I mentioned Uber and Airbnb, who clearly are challenged also by the current environment, but they have been created in the last crisis, during the financial crisis. You know, the energy crisis in the 70s, you know, a well-known company like Microsoft was actually created. And if you look back to the Great Depression, Disney was created during the Great Depression. So there are unicorns that without any doubt will be formed and will be created. And I think, you know, I can only encourage company leaders and to really explore this opportunity and really rethink how they can actually not only survive in the next normal, but how they can actually lead and build something that is differentiating and disrupts their own sector or adjacent sectors.
Yeah. Now, Ralph, when I introduced you, I didn't mention, of course, that you lead LEAP by McKinsey, right? Which is, I guess, the capability McKinsey has to help clients build such new businesses. And in your experience of having done this, I guess the last number I checked was over 200 times. How does somebody embark on this journey? Right? You've got the pressure of the economic crisis. You've got the pressure of the humanitarian and the healthcare crisis around that. You've got your board who is probably just asking you to stem the bleeding and win in your home field, as it were. How do you start this journey?
I mean, there are clearly. So first of all, it's quite interesting to see that how many of our clients were actually able to start this journey and really try to build this new business and business opportunities in a way that they sometimes even thought it wasn't possible. But I think there is something around, look, you need to find a way to pivot. So after the kind of short-term survival focus, there's absolutely a necessity to create the new business opportunity. You need to clearly, of course, think about, are you okay from a short-term cash flow perspective, et cetera, et cetera. But this creating and identifying these new business opportunities is in many instances a drive by, this is the only sustainable option to actually continue to be in business. And if I don't focus on it, it leads somehow to a slower recovery after the crisis, and we will lag behind the competitors. So, and in particular, as I said at the beginning, because the crisis has been so fundamental, almost every sector, every company is affected. So the key question to ask is, how does my company, my business look like in the next normal? And for many organizations, it will be something where I can see that in the next normal, my declined revenue line will just not pick up anymore. So I need to find alternatives. How can I fill this top line revenue gap? How can I find new revenue pools where I can get in, can access them? How can I find the next S-curve for my business? And that drives you directly into the business building management.
Right. And I think similar to the hole that you're describing on the top there, a lot of people are looking at their balance sheets and the big holes that are kind of emerging there. So how do you, again, in the interest of just trying to get your experience on how to get these engines started. How do you try and fill that top line gap without having necessarily all of the cash in your war chest or in your treasure chest to fund it, to fund this new venture? Or what have been some of the mechanisms that people have been looking at to raise funds or to get the level of investment? Actually, can we start new businesses in today's world with minimal investment? Maybe that's what's different.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe two thoughts on this one. So first of all, I think, this is not about having a great idea and let's just invest a lot of money to build a business around them. A good idea is not a good business. So I think rigor and a very good assessment of, is this idea really a good business versus it is just a good idea? I think that's hugely important. When we talk about business building, we mean business building. We don't mean just creating some venture startup based on a funny idea. So it is about a robust and rigorous assessment and stress testing of that business idea, because not every great idea is a great business. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing is that you will take always a short-term approach how you look at investments. So when we support clients building businesses, we will always do a very clearly defined milestone-based funding where we say every 3 months we look at this and we validate whether we are actually making progress, and we still believe that our assumption and our plans really stick to it. And I think only if you do those two things really well, you will end up building a business that you can not only launch without huge investment, but that you can also scale and will become very quickly cash neutral, cash positive, and therefore can somehow invest in itself again. So I think that way you can't take a financial risk completely away, but you can manage it in a much, much better way and limit it quite a lot.
And I think this dichotomy that you're describing, right, of great ideas and great businesses is extremely important. And if I, again, was looking around things in the last 8 months or so that have started, which have been a great idea, but actually have scaled into successful businesses versus things that started that were a great idea and literally stayed at that marking spot. And as I think through those examples, I'm just, again, questioning the types of people that have established a good idea and scaled it into a business, a successful business at that. What distinguishes these best of breed business builders, right? The type of people that you kind of meet on the circuit? What really sets them apart, and how are they overcoming the challenges that others essentially do not?
I mean, it obviously it's the kind of the silver bullet question, which clearly, one has to be realistic. What is possible, what is not possible. But maybe a couple of things that we've clearly learned from successful business builds versus not so successful business builds. I think first of all, we firmly believe that incumbents in particular, companies with existing businesses have got a huge advantage building new businesses. And that is something which we call the unfair advantage. So incumbents have got assets that can be leveraged to build new businesses. No startup can do that. And this unfair advantage, combining existing assets with a new disruptive idea, that puts you into a situation that normally means you are where a startup can only be a true startup in 2-3 years' time. Thinking about this, how can I create an unfair advantage by leveraging existing asset, but building something new, building a new disruptive business? I think that's one thing that we believe is hugely important. Then there's clearly the fundamental question about reimagining the future, and in particular, challenging existing assumption around the customer, for example. When I look at successful business builds, they really understood their customer really well. And they do that by not only thinking about it theoretically and do some market research, they're doing it by talking to customers, engaging with them, spending a lot of time with them, testing with them all the time. So the customer centricity of successful business is definitely one common theme. And by the way, whether that's B2C or B2B doesn't matter. The customer, or in the public sector, the citizen, being customer and citizen centric is absolutely crucial. And there's a very, very strong correlation between how customer centric your business is and how successful it will be and how successful it can be scaled. Then there's clearly, in particular with the COVID environment, the challenge of, well, we have to remote working is the standard, and as a result, we need to find a way to build businesses by working remotely. What is quite interesting, Jigar, and you know that, we have been actually extremely busy during the lockdown because we continue to build business remotely, which again comes back to the collaboration platform, business build idea. Collaboration platforms allow you now to do things that were never possible before. And I can genuinely say we have built, launched, and scaled businesses during the lockdown period. So there are things like external influences that might actually push you into kind of a more disadvantaged position, leverage them as an advantage. And from our perspective, as you know, we would now run certain types of ideation session on Zoom because we know they are more effective than doing them face to face. And that's something that we would always think about, how you can actually make what is perceived as a disadvantage, actually, how can you actually create an advantage out of that? Clearly, we need to focus on our external orientation, so don't do kind of desktop exercises, always go out, engage with customers, engage with the real world. But then there's also one thing that I feel is very important, which is the cultural element. In particular, also with remote working, creating a culture of a new business is absolutely huge. And this culture that you create by building the business, that will again be key differentiator and might be the success or failure criteria for many. So in the remote world in particular, even more so than before, be very, very focused on culture and create, not only based on a good idea, a robust business case and build it and launch it, but also focus on the people and create a very unique and differentiated culture that will actually help you to achieve some of the things that we've seen in the past few months.
I think if we just dwell on that the point, right, because I think obviously a core component of culture is talent. And as you embark on these new adventures to create new businesses, first of all, how do you source the talent? Because it is a different type of talent. I think in the few that I've been lucky enough to be a part of, it's always been, I know you said it's a race between a startup and an incumbent, but actually it's a race to really get the right talent in from the very top of the new organization that you're trying to build. And in a remote world, sourcing that talent, retaining it, and then creating a culture around that talent to bond it together such that they are kind of focused on the MO. I think that is something that really does set the best of breed business builders apart. And so if you could say a few words on the talent challenge and overcoming that, I think that would be great.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are a couple of sides to it, but maybe just one comment up front. I mean, if you think about some of our client work, the time and effort and the investment that we put into people and capability builds versus the actual business build is huge. And it's huge because we believe that is one of the key dimensions of a successful business build. So focusing on capability build and the cultures associated to the people who are part of that business build is absolutely key. Now, there is clearly this element that we discussed a little bit earlier about, you do have in the remote world now access to a global talent pool that you didn't have before. And doing these things remotely also means you've got a real access to them in a sustainable way. So there are also some positive elements that you can actually access talent pools that you weren't be able to access before because you thought it has to be all locally. And we have got these permanent discussions around, Agile was always meant to be you have to be all in the same room in order to do it effectively. Well, I mean, we've got many examples where remote Agile working is actually a very, very effective and very productive way of getting things done. And I do think that the talent is, for incumbents, for example, the talent is always a challenge because they just don't access the talent pools that we would need for a new business. So finding a way to approach them, finding a way to recruit them is very different to what an incumbent would typically do with their HR process. And there's nothing right or wrong with it. It's just like you don't have access to these. So helping clients to also find ways to access these pools and then to create the right, not only culture, but people model that incentivize them the right way to create the right working environment for them that's absolutely critical and is a very, very important building block of any good business builds that we've seen.
Ralph, you said a term that piqued my interest, people model. And I know, again, through some of the work and when you were last here in the Kingdom, when we were sat in the Kingdom Tower talking about this, you explained to me a little bit the different ways in which people, incumbents, right, large organizations are incentivizing their people to step away from their day-to-day role or from their line role into these new kind of avenues or channels, right? These new businesses that they're trying to build. Could you share a little bit the type of models that you've seen, and one in particular around the entrepreneur in residence? I really like that concept.
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, as you know, we've been supporting a couple of clients who look at business building as a strategic capability, as we mentioned before, and as such, they say we don't want to build one new business. We want to become serial business builders that take ideas that we've got or that we develop, combining them with assets that exist already, and creating new unicorns. And they want to do that at scale. And we've got examples where clients say, look, this approach will actually close my revenue gap with it's close to a double-digit billion figure. So we're not talking about more money. Yeah. So what approaches do they take? Now, people in the organizations very often have got ideas and very good ideas, but they've never been given the opportunity to actually live these ideas and create what they always dreamt of. So in one client in particular, we actually encourage or offer to people with ideas to come in to kind of a business build factory, a business build lab, where we create on a serial basis new businesses and become founder of a new company. And this is not a must, they don't have to, but if they want to, they can actually come out of their line role, coming in and becoming the founder or co-founder of the business idea that they have. The lab will then support them in terms of getting up running, addressing some of these things that we discussed in terms of how do you manage it from a financial perspective with the investments, doing your quarterly reviews, but also helping them to find the right team and build the capability and maybe add a couple of people initially before they're up and running. But also give them an attractive compensation model that doesn't look very different to an entrepreneur's business model, which says, look, you get a stake. You are an entrepreneur in residence, and you get a stake in the company that you're building because that's your baby, and we want to reward you for it. That creates a completely new environment, working environment for employees who have been sitting in an R&D function for 10 years or have been sitting in a business line for 8 years or something. And it creates this opportunity to also reinvent a little bit the culture of the incumbent. And what we've very often seen, once this is up and running, there will always be permanent feedback into the existing organization, and some of these ways of working will also feedback and therefore enrich also the work experience and the work attitude in the incumbent itself.
Right. I think this whole notion of having a new startup and incubating within that the right culture, the right talent model, some of the new types of core business processes, and then having that assimilated back into the mothership is something I've seen a number of corporates try out, including here in the Middle East. And I think just with a view to the time, maybe a couple more questions, Ralph. One is, how, again, when you are on this journey, now that you've started, you're committed to your board, you've found the business idea, and you are beginning to execute. What are some of the more, let's say, tactical observations that you've had of people that have then really expedited that journey to establish the product and get it out in the market, to reach the first 1,000 customers, to reach the first 1 million hits or whatever it may be? Once you've made the go decision, what are the types of actions that you've seen people take to really move at speed to get to the scaled business?
Yeah, I mean, we did some research on what is the probability to scale a launched new business, and clearly whether these figures are always 100% right, but I think based on what we've seen, like a typical standalone startup who has maybe a probability scale of about 2%. A corporate startup that we've created in the kind of a corporate context has got a higher probability. We reckon it's about 13 to 15%. We believe scalability should be at least 60 to 70% of business that you build, and that requires a few things. It requires at the kind of at the top level a very bold vision, a very customer-centric view, and a very rigorous recipe that you follow along the dimension that we discussed earlier, and a couple of more. But then it also really requires very often a mindset that is, quite different to the core business, that allows you to really, push the needle almost every day, and giving the teams the freedom to really push their idea and being absolutely 100% focused. And it is quite different how to see how the dynamics works in those teams. When we do this, we always set them up separately away from the core organization to already give them that freedom, and then almost protect them so that they don't have to follow certain processes, that they don't have to follow certain governance structures. Now, once you have launched, clearly you pivot a little bit and say, okay, now it's about how do we actually improve and how do we really scale quickly. So this how do we go to market is absolutely crucial, and we help a lot of clients with that in terms of really getting the go-to-market right and really scale very fast. If we don't scale fast, that's a very, very sudden death for many of business builds. So scaling very fast is important. But related to that is then also this mindset of, yes, we've launched, but now we don't stop. We release new, better functionality. We release new features, new products, new services in a very, very fast way, much faster than our mother company would ever do, and much faster than maybe also our competition would do. So this mindset of permanent improvement, continuous improvement in a very, very speedy way, that sets in particular once you've launched and once you scale. And combining that with a really well thought through and executed well go-to-market strategy, that makes a successful recipe to scale.
I think a lot of that also, Ralph, requires, in my observations, it requires a certain type of performance management of this new entity. It's not a well-established, often it's not a well-established business. Again, like you said, you have risks around talent and all sorts of other things. And so managing it in that first 6 to 12 months, like you manage other parts of your 100-year-old enterprise, is probably not the right thing to do. And so, again, what do the best managers do to give these new babies the healthiest start and the quickest ability to scale?
Yeah, I think the key unlock for a successful launch and scale is the team, and the team environment, morale, culture, whatever word you want to use. So because what is one of the biggest differences between these startup-ing new businesses? They're a small group of people with very, very different skill sets who have learned to work effectively together without any processes, policies, or any organizational boundaries. Actually, they've broken them down. That all of a sudden creates a team where everybody knows what he or she contributes to a broader common goal. And that creates an environment where all of a sudden people, interact in a very different way, interact in a much more collaborative way, in a much more productive way. So that achieving that kind of team that, despite the diversity of skill set, works as a team and speaks one language and has got one goal, to me, that is, and people always use a lot of sports examples, but that is exactly what we do in our business world. It is a team with very different skill sets, but it's a team with a common goal, and everybody knows about something that is relevant to achieve this common goal and will contribute that in their best possible way. For me, that is the key unlock.
Excellent. So I think we are coming up to the top of the hour, Ralph. Maybe one final question to you. Actually, two final questions. One is, personally, why are you excited to build new businesses in today's world, even before the crisis and during the crisis? And then secondly, any parting comments for people out there watching today who are thinking or just before about to make a decision on embarking on a new business building venture?
Yeah, so Jigar, look, as you know, I mean, personally, I think we are in a very similar boat here. It is, I think, it is moving companies, clients forward, moving also society forward in a way when we engage with clients on building new businesses. It's something to shape something new, to innovate, to create, to be part of the next normal. And you know, it's almost like, I think, as we described in some other place, you know, it is about building the future. And I that might sound very very ambitious, but it is about building the future. With the way we work, and I love to work with clients, and you know, I can't wait to come back to the region to do that more again, is you know, creating something new, something disruptive, something ambitious, something bold, that will innovate and will create kind of the next ESCO for a client, but also will create something more that actually will move us society more broadly forward. So I think that's just a very exciting and it's also a challenging way of trying to engage with executives in the private and public sector to actually take them on this journey, you know, because it is a journey. It is very different to think about a new disruptive business versus managing your existing business, and taking people on the journey and see how they get on this journey and they jump on the train, and then I got really excited about creating something very special and something that really stands out. I think that is very satisfying, and we both know that's a great experience. In terms of your last question about what is it that I would give people on their way, look, we are in the crisis, and a crisis has always got challenges, and we shouldn't ignore that. And there will be, you know, continuous health challenges. There will be continuous economic challenges, and we can't recognize it. But it is also a time for innovation. It is a time for thinking boldly, thinking about new disruptive opportunities that will be created in the next normal that will look very different once we are through the pandemic and once we're through the economic crisis. So be bold and come up, and don't shy away to have bold and really ambitious idea. The second one, which I mentioned a few times before, but it's so important for me, be customer centric. B2C, B2B, citizen versus customer, whatever, but be customer citizen centric. It is so important that whatever you do it from a customer lens rather than from your own lens. And then last but not least, as hopefully we got this across a little bit in the last 45, 50 minutes, you know, you have to be rigorous. Whilst it is about innovation and ideation and being creative, you always, if you want to be successful, not only launch, but also scale, you have to be rigorous, and you have to follow a very clear recipe that gets you to your outcomes that you actually set up. And it is sometimes better to stop an idea very soon and say, great idea, not a great business, rather than to kick the can down the road for another few months without any success. So be bold, be customer centric, and be rigorous, and follow a clear recipe. That would be my advice.
Excellent. Well, first of all, thank you, Ralph. Thank you for spending the hour with me and with all of us, and sharing your perspectives, sharing also very clearly your excitement of building new businesses to create the future that's ahead of us. I would also like to thank the MCIT team and the ThinkTech team for organizing this series of conversations. I look forward to the next one. I think our time is up now, so thank you very much, and thank you all for viewing.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.